Hello and welcome to another episode of WVU Extension Today. I'm your host, Zach Harold. We're going to begin today's episode with a trip to Upshur County, West Virginia, where we'll meet the Owens. They're a couple who decided to spend their retirement years growing popcorn, which they sell under the name Mountain Ears. Get it? Let's go check it out.
I'm Leslie Owen.
And I'm Joe Owen, and we are the proprietors of Mountain Ears Popcorn. We grow and produce yellow mushroom popcorn. Mushroom is a variety of popcorn. There's two varieties, mushroom and snowflake. And snowflake is bigger, and it's usually what you get at the theater. Mushroom is tighter and more flavorful. The kernels are a little bit smaller, but they're more dense and they're a lot more flavorful. We have a little one-row corn planter that we pull behind a garden tractor. With her pulling it, it's a very consistent speed and it lays the corn out just right. And we get about 30 rows, yeah, about 30 rows of popcorn. From there, all you do is pray that your corn's gonna come up and not get eaten by either deer or crows or whatever. Probably in mid-October, early November, we'll pick the corn. And what we do is we have a sled, and I have a rope I put around my waist, and I walk down between the rows, and I do one row at a time. Can't do two because you forget where you are. And I take each ear of corn, peel the husk back, twist it off and throw it in the sled, and I keep moving, and I just go back and forth until the sled is full, and I pull it over to the pickup truck and I empty the sled in the pickup truck and go back. Then it goes on the trampoline. We use a trampoline because if you know the texture of a trampoline mat, it's porous, it has holes, and so air will travel through it. So what we do is we spread the corn out on the trampoline and we put a box fan under it blowing straight up. If it just sits in its own moisture, it will get moldy. 24/7, that fan runs, and probably will run for anywhere from 40 to 90 days. And we test the moisture level with a moisture meter, a grain moisture meter. We take a sample of the corn, put it in the moisture meter, and it'll tell us what percentage is moisture. We shoot for 13.5%. 13.5% makes it where the popcorn is very lively and will pop well. Every corn cob is inspected, and if there are irregular kernels, a kernel that maybe a bug got on or something, each of us has a little tiny screwdriver, and we'll sit in an evening and just sit there popping bad kernels off of cobs and making a pile that we'll do the next day when we shell the corn. We have a corn sheller, and it's probably over 100 years old, and it looks like a little device of torture. It's got a crank that I turn, and I put the cobs in there, and it takes the kernels off the cob, spits the cob out one side, the kernels go everywhere into a box that we collect the corn, and then we winnow it. When the corn sheller knocks the corn kernels off the cob, it also knocks off little pieces of the cob. And it almost looks like snowflakes. It's very, very light. It's chaff. And so we have to get rid of that because you don't want that in your popcorn. And so we have a series of fans and a little chute with a grid on it that we run the corn down, and as the corn falls, the fans are forcing air through it, and it's blowing that really light chaff away, and the heavier corn falls down. And we measure out 2.5 cups, and that's what goes into each bag that we seal, so once it's sealed, it will not gain or lose moisture, because keeping that moisture level and that freshness is really important for the quality of the corn. When you heat it up, it creates steam inside of the kernel. And when that steam, the pressure just builds up and builds up and builds up, it explodes. Actually, we have tried putting it in a paper bag in a microwave.
And it will pop.
It will pop, but you don't get as good a product as you do when you do it on the stove top. Let me show you the popcorn popper. It has an agitator. This goes around the bottom of the pot to keep the corn from burning. I use coconut oil. According to the directions on the top of your Mountaineers popcorn, the label, 2 tablespoons of oil. Go ahead and take a half a cup of popcorn and put in. Okay, we're gonna light the stove and we're gonna keep it on medium high. You've got the popcorn and the oil and you can put it on there. And this little crank here turns the agitator, that little thing in the bottom. Coconut oil has a very high smoke point. In other words, it'll get very hot before it'll start smoking. Besides that, the coconut oil has a really good flavor. And when it starts popping, then I start agitating. Oh, okay, you just heard one.
Well, when we met, Joe phoned my office and asked for a date. And I had braces late in life, still had braces. And when he phoned and asked me to go to lunch, I said, could we go somewhere that makes popcorn? I just got my braces off. I haven't had popcorn in 2 years.
That was our first date.
Our first date. That was kind of kismet.
The 6th annual Mountain State Maple Days are going to kick off in just a few weeks. They're held on the 3rd Saturday in both February and March, and it gives folks an opportunity to visit sugar shacks for some food and fun, and to see how much work goes into the maple syrup you pour over your pancakes. We had WVU Extension Agricultural Economics Specialist Dee Sing Knight stop by to tell us what we can expect at Maple Days and what this event means for West Virginia's agritourism industry.
Maple Days are February 18th and March 18th of this year. It's a way to welcome visitors to what we call these sugar shacks, where maple is actually tapped and produced as a way of growing the industry. A vital part of agritourism, meaning it's a way to have visitors come in and see how maple syrup is being produced, and then all of the value-added products that go along with that. Extension has been significantly involved with helping maple syrup producers in terms of our agritourism initiatives. So they participate in training courses where we help them to build, sustainable and viable agribusinesses. Prior to COVID, we had worked with the maple syrup producers to help them to develop what we call these agritourism clusters specifically for Maple Days. A maple producer would work in collaboration or partnership with other businesses in the area. When your visitors and your tourists come into an area, they want to do more than just visit a maple sugar shack. They want to be able to eat and maybe go skiing and something like that. So it's a way to offer an all-round experience to the visitors. It's a wonderful way to start off the agritourism year in West Virginia. It's the first, agriculture offering basically in the state, because you do need to have that just around freezing temperature where the sap actually runs and where producers will be able to tap the trees and extract the sap. For our agritourism operations, it's one of the first activities that they will have, and it's a great way to bring people to the farm, and then a great way to then help them understand what else they can do on that farm or in that region for the rest of the year.
Did you know WVU has its own sugar shack? It's true. That's quite the operation. Let's join WVU Extension Forest Resources Specialist Dave McGill on a trip to the WVU Research Forest, where we'll learn how to identify a maple tree. Then we'll catch up with WVU Associate Professor of Silviculture Jamie Schuler, who will show us how a sugar shack operates and how much work goes into a gallon of maple syrup.
Maple syrup's been around since indigenous people, so it's been around hundreds and maybe thousands of years. Maple syrup, extends from people having thousands of taps, 7,000, I know, or more taps in these trees, and you'll see those later, but to just a family with a couple trees, they tap them and boil it down. They'll hang a bucket right on the tree and just collect that way, versus a system like this is more advanced and more sophisticated, and it produces more. Finding sugar maples in your woods is not too difficult. Generally, they have a smoother gray bark, and it's kind of modeled on the surface, a little kind of warty in some cases. The small ones look different than the big ones, of course. They change as they age, but as the trees get bigger, they'll still retain their smooth kind of gray bark, but they'll have these long kind of plates that peel up on one side generally, and those are fairly thick plates. We'll see some out here. The most productive ones are the sugar maples, but red maple as well. It has a good sugar content, good sap flow. All the maples can be tapped. Even box elder, which is a type of a maple, not too many people know that, but box elder can be tapped. You just need more sap to boil down to 1 gallon. It takes more gallons of sap to make a gallon of maple syrup. This is a modern sugar camp. This is an educational facility, but also they'll also be out here boiling sap, and so this is kind of what it looks like. So we're very fortunate. It's a great facility for students to come out here and learn how to tap trees and learn about kind of the biology and the management of a sugar bush. There's all sorts of techniques and technology associated with a sugar bush like this one. You can see all the pipes, all the tubes, and there's cool equipment that you use to splice and put them together, put them into the trees, make connections, and so forth. But generally, they keep the main lines up all year. And then just recently, within the past 3 weeks, the students have been out here. The students are part of a course that Dr. Jamie Schuler teaches. So we're very lucky here at West Virginia University to have this facility, this sugar bush and the sugar shack.
This sugar bush operation started in 2014 with a grant from the West Virginia Department of Agriculture, especially crop block grant. And that's funneled through from some federal funding. Gave us the money to buy basically the equipment that you see out there, and the university put in some money for the buildings. The magical thing about making syrup, it's really not that difficult. All you do is boil a whole bunch of water. At 2%, which a lot of people use as kind of that rough estimate, we have to have about 43 gallons of sap to make 1 gallon of maple syrup. Our trees aren't quite as good here, or at least don't have quite the sugar content. And so we're probably boiling 53 gallons of water to get that 1 gallon of maple syrup. Effectively, what we're doing, and what all operations do, is just try to find efficient ways to remove that water. One of the reasons that we're out here is that this particular property has a fairly decent amount of sugar maple. It's our state tree. It's obviously one that's important for us as well. But just from a sheer number standpoint, we seem to have a lot more reds. But it's nice that this particular property has sugar maple. It tends to have a higher sugar content, which is why people prefer it. What we're trying to do is provide a conduit to get the sap from the tree down to our sugar house. Okay, and that's basically what we're looking at here, is just kind of an elaborate plumbing system. This little spout here, this spile, there's a hole that's drilled into the tree, only about 2 inches deep. And we insert this spout into the tree, and that's just a little elbow basically. And that provides an opportunity for that sap to drip out into the spout, down this tube, into this long line that goes up and down the hill. And it just flows via gravity down the slope there, and we collect it into that tank. And so there's a pump way up on the farm, and we run about 1,000 feet of tubing that provides vacuum to this machine, which is called a releaser. And basically what that does is it allows vacuum to come into this machine, go up those lines. So we talk about those lines that come down the hill. This machine distributes that vacuum to those lines, and the sap runs down the hill through these lines here into this releaser. And what this basically does is it allows the vacuum and the sap to coexist. And so when the sap comes in here, it drains into this tank. There's a float in here. That float raises, and when it gets to a certain point, it dumps. And what that does is it temporarily cuts that vacuum off. Otherwise, it wouldn't be able to dump that sap out of the tank. And so the sap dumps, we collect it into this big tank here. Once we get a sufficient amount, we'll run it through that reverse osmosis machine that we talked about. When we run it through the reverse osmosis, we'll then pump it into this upper tank. And this upper tank is what's connected to our evaporator. And so through this tubing system here, it goes into the other building, and that's where we'll start the boiling process. So most of the boiling takes place in this back pan, which is about 4 feet long, and ours is 2 feet wide. And then it comes into the front pan, which is what we call the syrup pan. And this is where we talked about that flavor development in maple syrup, and that's where a lot of it happens here. And so these two pans are connected via this pipe. And so when the sap is ready, it comes through this pipe and into this front box. And what you'll see is that it has a series of channels in there. And what will happen is, as that syrup changes density, it keeps getting moved forward and forward and forward. And so as that water or that sap in there evaporates, it concentrates that syrup. And so as it evaporates, we get more water taking its place, coming in behind. And so each one of those channels that you see in this pan is closer and closer to syrup, okay, as it evaporates out. Basically, the last part of this process is drawing off when it becomes syrup. And so syrup is legally syrup when it's 7.1 degrees above the boiling point of water. And so that changes depending on elevation. So water boils at 212 at sea level, and it probably boils about 210 here just because of our elevation. And so you add 7 degrees to that, and so it's about 217 or so, which would be when we would draw off. And so when we have our thermometer here, and so when we see that it's 217 or close to it, that's when we basically will open the valve and draw off the syrup from that pan. And once it's syrup, what we typically will do, what producers will do is then they'll run it through some sort of a filtration system just to clear out some of the sediment, a lot of the calcium, magnesium, some of those minerals that precipitate out during that boiling process. We just remove that because people don't want to taste that in their pancakes. So we just run that through a simple filter, and then it goes into a bottle and on a shelf somewhere.
The WVU Dining with Diabetes program teaches folks how to prepare easy, healthy, and tasty meals while also teaching them about nutrition, exercise, meal planning, and more. The program is free and open to anybody with diabetes, pre-diabetes, as well as their family members and caregivers. Our team stopped by one of those classes to give you a first-hand look. Let's check it out.
I'm a diabetic and a few other issues, and so are most of the people here with other issues, but we have a camaraderie amongst us. I've learned a lot about the carbohydrates and portion control and reading the labels on the back of the packages. When we're finished after learning the technicalities of how to properly eat, then we get to taste these recipes and we figure out what we like, what we don't, and we learn a lot. When I started this class, I kind of sparked my mind a little bit as to what I can do to help myself, and I just want to feel better. And I have. They're very well spoken. They care about the people. They really care about what they're doing. They're very intelligent, very knowledgeable about nutrition. If you get a chance, you're having trouble with your diabetes or any other issue, if you get a chance to take one of these classes, it is well worth your time to do this and to learn. So after this class today, I'm going to the grocery store to get my chicken.
Those instructors sure know their stuff, and the food demo looked delicious. But if you're like me and haven't yet invested in a smell-o-vision, I think we were only getting part of the experience. but we're in luck. Family and Community Development Agent Gwen Crum is here to walk us through a Dining with Diabetes recipe that we can prepare at home. Let's learn how to make some pork chops.
Hi, my name is Gwen Crum, and I'm a WVU Extension Agent in Wood County. And I'm going to do a recipe today with you called pork chops with a maple pear glaze. So this is a recipe we use in our Dining with Diabetes program. Dining with Diabetes is a program for people with diabetes and their caretakers, so they can learn about diabetes, and also they can learn some cooking techniques and some recipes that will help them manage their diabetes and hopefully live healthier lives. This is a great recipe in the wintertime because it kind of mixes that sweet and savory flavors and gives you that comfort food feeling. So before we get into the recipe itself, or they're demonstrating the recipe, I want to talk to you a little bit about some of the ingredients we're using. So obviously it's a maple pear glaze that we're going to be putting on these pork chops. So I have bought some local maple syrup. And while it might seem odd that we're using maple syrup in a recipe for people with diabetes, we're only going to use a couple tablespoons, and so you're not going to be getting a lot of sugar, but it does give us that true maple flavor. And so I have some actual maple syrup here that we're going to use. Also, I'm going to be using something called a Splenda brown sugar blend. So this blend is a great substitute for brown sugar. It's partial brown sugar and partial Splenda. You can use it as a substitute for brown sugar, and the information on the back gives you the conversion if you're needing to use it in a different recipe, but it is one of the ingredients in this recipe. And then we're also going to be using cloves in this recipe, and if that's not something you're familiar with, cloves is something that they often use in the sweet potato casserole or a pumpkin pie. It's a great fall and winter spice that we use in a lot of different recipes. So that is going to be something we're also going to be using. These are ground cloves. Some recipes also will call for whole cloves, but this specific recipe calls for ground cloves. I'm also going to be then, of course, using actual pears. And so a trick that it's important to remember with pears is sometimes when you get pears in the grocery store, they are not yet completely ripe. And so they're hard, they're difficult to bite into, and they're difficult to cut up, which is what we're going to do with this recipe. So a little trick for that is to just put the pear inside the brown paper bag for a few days. I bought these pears about 4 days ago. And so I just put it in a brown paper bag, close that up, and leave it set on your countertop or in maybe a warmer place in your kitchen. Not directly on the stove, obviously, but somewhere that it's going to be warm but also dry. And over time, those pears will ripen up and make it so that you're able to cut those pears. So those are some of the ingredients we're going to be using. I wanted to tell you a little bit about as we get into the recipe. So this recipe is going to use 2 pork chops. So I have purchased boneless pork chops, but you may also use bone-in. Either way, they will work and you'll get the same result. Just depends on your preference and what sort of pork chops you like. So these are going to be 2 boneless pork chops, and I'm going to put them in the oven for about 15 to 20 minutes at 350 degrees. So I've got all these ingredients in my pan: the butter, the cloves, the brown sugar blend, and the pears and the mustard. And we're gonna let this cook until the juices of the pears release, and it makes a fruity little glaze that we'll be able to put over our pork chops once they've finished baking. So I've taken the pork chops out of the oven, and I'm going to check to make sure that they have reached an internal temperature of 160 degrees. And then I'm going to show you the glaze here, which has been cooking and releasing the juices from those pears. Once it started boiling, I turned it into a low simmer, and it's been cooking on my stovetop while the pork chops are baking in the oven. And so you can see that those juices are released, and we have a nice little glaze here on our pork chops. So as you can see, I have plated the pork chop with half of the maple pear glaze, and this is going to be a great entree for your dinner that you could pair with a non-starchy side dish to have a healthy meal. If you or someone you know would be interested in participating in a Dining with Diabetes class, please contact your local extension office for in-person classes near you, or visit our website at extension.wvu.edu for a list of virtual classes.
Well, I think I know what I'm having for dinner tonight. Thank you for joining us for another episode of WVU Extension Today. We sure appreciate your time, and we hope you'll join us here next time.